The chandelier over the Jade Palace glittered like a frozen waterfall, casting a cold, unforgiving light across the long lacquered table where the empire of one woman held court. The air smelled of sandalwood and expensive wine. Waiters moved in silence. Ghosts in black uniforms, never acknowledged except when a hand snapped or a jeweled finger pointed. At the head of the table sat Liwi Aries of Y Industries, a woman whose name carried weight across Asia like the sound of iron doors slamming shut. She was 44, her face lifted by skillful surgeons but her eyes harder than polished jade. Every movement she made dripped with arrogance, as if the air itself bent to accommodate her presence. Around her, 5 American businessmen laughed on cue, laughed too loudly, laughed even when they didn't understand. Because a woman worth $60 billion didn't need to be funny to earn laughter. She only needed to gesture, and grown men would scramble to provide the sound. David Thompson poured the wine, his expression still as glass. He had mastered the art of invisibility over the past 8 months, the bowed shoulders, the averted eyes, the controlled breathing of a man who understood that survival depended on silence. But beneath the quiet mask, his mind was alive, precise, cataloging every word that left her painted lips. Liwi spoke Mandarin, her voice as sharp as a blade hidden in silk. She did not lower her tone, did not disguise her venom. She assumed no one in this New York dining hall understood her except the 3 Chinese assistants at her side. "Look at that monkey serving our table," she said, her fingers flicking in David's direction as though pointing out a smudge on porcelain. "I doubt he even knows how to use chopsticks properly." In America, they think giving such creatures work is progress. How laughable. Her assistant chuckled dutifully. The Americans smiled nervously, confused but desperate not to appear ignorant. They didn't know what had been said, but they knew it was safe to laugh when Liwi smiled. David's hand remained steady as he poured. He had poured wine for ambassadors in Beijing, ministers in Shanghai, senators in Washington. He knew how to hold a decanter so the stream never broke, how to angle the wrist so the bottle did not drip. But now, every ounce of discipline pressed against the tide of rage rising inside him. 8 months earlier, he had been Dr. David Thompson, a diplomat, scholar, the leading American authority on Sino-US cultural relations. He had lectured in universities across the world, published articles cited by ambassadors, coordinated high-level talks between Washington and Beijing. At 32, he had built a career most men twice his age would envy. Then Marcus Sterling, a jealous colleague with ambitions larger than his conscience, planted false documents that branded David a traitor. 7 months of FBI investigation followed, 7 months of cameras outside his apartment, headlines screaming "diplomat under suspicion," colleagues crossing streets to avoid him. By the time the forgeries were exposed, by the time his innocence was undeniable, his reputation was ruined. No embassy, no university, no think tank wanted the taint of a man once accused of espionage. And so David wore the uniform of a waiter. Black jacket, white shirt, bow tie, invisible, disposable. Tonight, however, something burned behind his eyes, a dangerous calm that only exists in men who have endured worse humiliations than most could imagine. Liwi leaned back, swirling her glass of champagne, her bracelets clinking like chains. "That one probably never finished school," she continued in Mandarin, her tone dripping mockery. "In my country, someone like him would clean toilets, not serve civilized people." Her assistants laughed again. One of the Americans, Robert Hayes, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't know what had been said, but the cruelty in her tone carried across any language barrier. He tried to change the subject, mumbling about import quotas, but Liwi waved him off like an insect. David's eyes flicked to her reflection in the polished silver pitcher. He remembered the emails, 3 years of polite, formal correspondence with her company, when he was still a cultural attaché tilde copyright at the US Embassy in Beijing. She had even praised him once in a press release. "Dr. Thompson is the American who truly understands our culture." Now she stared past him as if he were furniture. The laughter stabbed into him, but he said nothing. He refilled glasses, cleared plates, nodded silently when ordered. Yet every insult was a stone in a wall he was building inside his mind, a wall that would not collapse but rather trap her in the prison of her own words. More wine, Liwi snapped in broken English, deliberately mispronouncing the word wine as Wayne. Her lips twisted with pleasure at the butchery. Hurry, don't spill. Or maybe Americans think this is progress too, giving monkeys trays to carry. The Americans chuckled weakly. None dared confront her, not with billion-dollar contracts at stake. David leaned in to pour. She avoided his eyes. Of course she did. Why acknowledge the humanity of an inferior? Inside, David whispered to himself in Mandarin, "The knife that cuts deepest is the one they never see coming." The evening dragged forward like a blade across stone, every minute grinding David's patience thinner. The air inside the Jade Palace grew heavy with incense and arrogance. For nearly 40 minutes, Liwi Aries turned dinner into a theater of humiliation. She performed cruelty with the precision of a seasoned actress, slipping between Mandarin and mocking English, savoring the discomfort she produced in her guests. "This monkey must think he'll get a big tip tonight," she murmured in Mandarin, dabbing the corner of her painted lips with a linen napkin. "In America, they think money makes everyone equal. How childish." Her assistant chuckled obediently. The businessman laughed nervously, not understanding the words but sensing the venom behind them. Robert Hayes shifted in his chair again, his eyes flicking toward David, who stood silently at his side, tray balanced perfectly in hand. David's face was carved from stone, but inside, memory after memory rose like waves in a storm. 9 months earlier, he had dined across from the Chinese ambassador herself in Washington, toasting billion-dollar trade deals, his Mandarin flawless, his reputation impeccable. 9 months earlier, Liwi would have bowed her head slightly in respect if he entered a room. Now she called him a monkey. "Americans are pathetic," Liwi continued, switching to English so the businessman could understand. "You give these people jobs, pretend it is progress, but look at him. He cannot even hold a tray without shaking." Her laughter filled the hall. David was not shaking with fear. His hand trembled from the force it took to keep rage from spilling outward. He steadied the tray, drew a long silent breath, and let his anger crystallize into something sharper, colder. He remembered Marcus Sterling's smirk when the FBI carried away boxes of his files. He remembered the headlines, the whispers, the way even his friends avoided his calls. He remembered the silence of his old colleagues once he was cleared, a silence more painful than accusation. He had endured all of that without breaking. He would endure this too. For now. "Bring the bill," Liwi ordered, her English clipped, her accent exaggerated to mock. "And tell the little girl I am Liwi from Y Industries. Maybe she has seen me on television." David nearly choked. Y Industries. Of course, the same company whose trade delegations he had coordinated at the embassy. The same heiress who had praised his work publicly, who had smiled at him through video conferences as if he were an equal. Now she looked straight through him. "You know the problem with America?" she continued in Mandarin, savoring every word. "You think democracy makes everyone equal. But some people are born superior. Others are broken by inferior. It is nature's order." She pointed at David with her jeweled hand. "That one, for example. I would bet he has children from 3 different fathers. Probably lives crammed in a dirty apartment with 10 others. That is how these people live. Ignorant, promiscuous, lazy." The words slid into David like knives, but not new knives, old ones, familiar, honed by centuries of contempt. He absorbed them without flinching. Every insult was a note in the symphony of her destruction. Robert Hayes cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should return to the contracts, Miss Arisa." "No," she snapped. "Let me finish my sociology lesson. You Americans must understand who you are dealing with." David refilled her glass, his hand steady now. His rage cooled into steel. He was no longer swallowing humiliation. He was storing it, banking it, waiting. "What is your name?" Liwi asked suddenly, switching to English. She pointed at David as one might at a dog. "David, Mom." She rolled the name on her tongue like a bitter taste. "David. Have you ever heard of China?" "Yes, Mom. Her laugh was sharp and cruel. How cute. He knows where China is. She turned to the table and said in Mandarin, I would bet my fortune this monkey has never left New York in his life. The businessman shifted uncomfortably. The silence in the restaurant deepened. David straightened, met her gaze for the first time that night. His eyes no longer avoided hers. They locked, and in them burned a calm, dangerous recognition. Liwi didn't notice. She was too busy savoring her performance.